Welcome to the podcast here on Ellen Allen Substack. I am Ellen Allen, your friendly host, and this is the podcast where we talk about the fundamental truths and the bigger picture things relating to classical vocal music, the classical music industry, and vocal pedagogy. And today we are discussing some of the classical music industry side of things. And what we're talking about today is a topic that I think is really important for all classical musicians and all musicians generally, I think, to be aware of, especially if you identify as a professional musician or a working musician. We're going to talk about a topic today that I think is really important to consider as you make your way through your career and carve out the artistic path that you really want for yourself. So, we are talking today about prestige and the role that prestige and prestige credits play in the life of a classical musician or any musician. I just say classical musician because that is my particular background. I am a classical singer myself, and I have seen how this real preoccupation with prestige is really prevalent across the classical music industry. And I'm going to talk about why I don't think this is generally a good thing. We're going to talk about how it starts in academia, and as musicians are thinking about pursuing an academic path in classical music, and how that preoccupation continues to exist after they graduate and they enter the industry, leaving us with lots of scarcity, lots of unhealthy competition in the industry, and leaving lots of musicians feeling like they don't have the leg up to do the things and get hired at the places that they want to get hired at as professional musicians. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the prestige trap and looking at some ways that we can rethink the idea of credentials in classical music. What makes for a qualified musician? What is not necessary to be considered a qualified musician? And how can we work to sort of reshape the industry so that people who do not have lots and lots of prestige credits on their resume can still feel like they have a viable career path forward? So we're going to get right into it. I'm just moving some screens around here. Okay. So, before I dive in here, I just want to offer, a few disclaimers, as it were. And, especially if you are a classical musician yourself and you've been in the industry for a while, some of the things I say here might seem a little bit controversial. But know that my goal here is not to offend anyone, right? My goal is not to denigrate anyone or denigrate anyone's artistry, or credentials or the institutions where they might study or work. But we are simply pointing out a greater phenomenon that I see happening in our industry, about how we as classical musicians have been trained to think about credentials from the beginning of our training. Credentials, qualifications, reputation. And I think that some of this is often unhelpful at best, and very detrimental, actually, at the worst. So, we're going to talk about how sort of like the preoccupation with prestige begins in academia. It flows over into the industry, and it tends to, in my opinion, create scarcity, unhealthy competition, and almost creating a currency around prestige and creating this important or this really important to recognize dichotomy between sort of like the prestige haves and the prestige have-nots. There is this distinction in the industry that I think that we need to be aware of. So I just, want you to know that even though I'm going to say some things about academia and about the industry here, that I'm not against academia in and of itself. I believe that it remains, in the absence of viable alternatives yet to be found, I believe that it remains the best place for musicians to receive an immersive, systematic, rigorous artistic education and to build up a skill set, a robust skill set quickly in a short amount of time. I don't think that it should be the be all end all of any musician's training. I think that there is plenty of education still to be had even after you leave academia. But in this day and age, it is still an essential starting place, I think. So I am not against it. I myself am a working classical singer. I have 2 degrees. Excuse me. I have a Bachelor of Music in Vocal Performance and a Master of Music in Voice. And I'm thankful that I had the means and the opportunity to earn both of these degrees. And I'm really grateful for the skills and the relationships that I built, while completing each of these degrees, all the friends I made, all the connections I made, all the opportunities I got to perform. So I'm going to point out some issues that I think exist in academia, but I do have a lot of respect for those individuals who are working in academia as teachers, as instructors, as coaches and mentors, because I know that they are passionate, hardworking people who really care about their students and care that their students not only develop the skill, but the traits and the mindsets necessary to succeed as professionals. Likewise, I have also great respect for musicians who work for prestigious performance-based institutions or organizations. So things like opera houses or symphony orchestras and things like that. I know that these paths are extremely competitive, and that it requires a ton of hard work and sacrifice to get to where those people are. So I admire that. I admire that grit and that perseverance that you have for your career. Finally, before we dive in, I'm just going to point out that my work is, as I mentioned, I'm a working classical singer. I am also an independent voice teacher. So I am operating outside of academia. I have never taught or coached in academia before. And I have been doing this a long time, a decade and a half at least. And I have worked with voices of all ages, all levels, all sort of levels of talent and skill. And, I've worked with students singing in multiple genres. So, given that background as a vocal pedagogue and the amount of training that I myself had to do in non classical styles to develop the versatility to teach a wide variety of students, I probably have a little bit of a different perspective coming at this from the voice teacher angle, from the voice training angle. Um, Maybe different from other classical folks, who are teaching or working in the industry. So I do, ask that you just engage with an open mind here. And I encourage you, if you want to hear more about, my philosophies around teaching and performing, you're welcome to check out the Substack articles that I have written over here, or some of the more recent podcasts that we have done, which have touched on some of these topics as well. So this discussion, excuse me, is meant to address ways that we can change the way we think about credentials and reputation and qualifications and resume line items and things like that in a way that will help to equalize the playing field for all musicians, I believe, and elevate artistic skill instead of prestige as the industry's most important currency, or the industry musician's most important currency. Rather than the prestige that comes through just titles and associations and things like that. So, if you'd like to share your own thoughts about this topic, you are welcome to, engage thoughtfully in the comments. I welcome any discussion here, but please, I ask that you engage with an open mind with these things. Okay, so this is not the first time I have talked about this topic. I have written about this before. Again, you can go back through my Substack and kind of see um, discussions that are adjacent to this topic, but I want to address it directly and sort of head on, because I feel like as classical musicians, our perceived need for prestige is so strong and so prevalent, that we tend to operate in this place where prestige as a currency often trumps other important forms of currency, such as reputation or well-being or actual money. Um, And by that, I mean, when classical musicians weigh opportunities that are presented to them, should I take this job? Should I take this gig? Is this a good opportunity for me? They consider a lot of different factors, of course, right? Um, but I would say that in many cases, or even in most cases, prestige is almost always foremost among those factors. It is at least among the top three. Even if the musician does not recognize the fact that they are weighing the prestige factor, they probably are, because I believe that this preoccupation is so ingrained in the classical music industry that we do not even realize that we do this, because we have been so strongly conditioned to seek prestige above, or at least alongside, anything else. And we do not even realize that we are putting this currency at a higher value than other currencies that are important for our careers. So, what do we mean by prestige? Just like objectively, let's talk about what it is, kind of define it. So, it means basically standing or estimation in the eyes of another person, or someone's weight or credit, in general opinion. How you command that position in people's minds. Or it could mean like, widespread respect or admiration for someone based on what you perceive their achievements to be, or their quality of work to be. So if you think about these definitions, right, they really talk about prestige being rooted in perception, not necessarily in facts or reality, but in perception. So I want you to just keep that kind of in the back of the mind, because we're going to come back to it later and talk more about what that means. But for now, I want to take a look at how this desire for prestige plays out in our classical music industry and in the voice teaching industry also, and the implications that this has for all the musicians in those fields and those aspiring to be in those fields. So, I love the classical music industry. I love the classical music tradition because it's so very steeped in like deep historical traditions. The music that we play and sing goes back hundreds of years, and it's each piece is like a really important reflection of the social, the cultural, sometimes the political contexts in which it was composed. And that requires us to have a really deep understanding and a multi-layered understanding of these things. So we need to understand not just the complex mechanics of the music that we play and sing, or the aesthetics and the style of the music, but the circumstances under which and the reasons for which it was composed. That is all really, really important. So classical music is such a rich art form. There's a lot of beauty to mine there. And I think that those who perform it or practice it, or even those who simply appreciate it, they understand how important it is to our 21st century world. And classical musicians, if you are one, then we study for years to become well versed in this art form. And, because its traditions go back such a long way and they are so deeply rooted, the standards and the expectations for the artists who perform this genre of music, they are fairly crystallized and codified and require a certain depth of study to understand and to execute well. Um, this does not mean that, classical music is elitist. It just means that it is a more complex art form than some of the other musics that exist in the world today. And I believe that the traditions from whence classical music comes should be honored as we, continue to perform this music in our modern age. And for a lot of centuries, right, these traditions and these skills were handed on to each generation of artists by the masters who came before them. And this was often done in like a very intimate one-to-one mentorship kind of context. But starting in the late 19th century, classical music training started shifting more toward academic institutions. And by the middle of the 20th century, most colleges and universities were offering degree programs in classical music. So nearly all of today's classical musicians who are working in the industry have had at least some exposure to academia or direct experience with academia. So most of them, I would wager, have bachelor's degrees. Many have master's degrees. And now there are a growing number of people who are doing doctoral level work or who have doctoral level degrees as well. Um, so part of this is like, it's kind of coupled with the idea in our Western society in general that like you must go to college, you must get a degree in something in order to have like a chance in life. Um, so I think that this shift into academia um, came along with that same sort of quest for prestige and credentials that we do see in other fields. So it's not that this phenomenon does not exist in other fields or other disciplines. I just feel that it is very strong in the arts. So you have high school students who vie for limited spots at Ivy League institutions, and then you have musicians who are doing the same thing in their world, competing for spots in places like Juilliard or Curtis or New England Conservatory, things like that. And so that means that the prestige markers of where you went to school, who you studied with, who you coach with, what kinds of degrees you have, those are widely accepted in the industry as indicative of a musician's success or skill level. We're going to talk more about that later. Um, I would say that, and this continues into the industry after musicians leave academia. So we see it playing out, um, with musicians, competing for spots in top level orchestras or on the rosters for, prominent opera houses and things like that, or other household name institutions. Those are considered like the elite spots that you must try for, that you must work toward if you are a classical musician who wants to actually go somewhere with your career. So I think that a lot of these organizations, these institutions, they breed a lot of scarcity mindset among artists and a lot of unhealthy competition. It all plays into this prestige mindset, this prestige like preoccupation. So prestige becomes this thing that you either have or you do not, or you either have lots of it or you have very little of it or none of it. So we have the haves and we have the have-nots when it comes to prestige. You are either prestige rich, which means that you have a lot of associations with top level schools and teachers and programs and organizations, or you are like many, many qualified musicians who do not have these credits or do not have them in the amount that other musicians do. And um or these people have, through no fault of their own, not reached these like sort of like coveted upper echelons of the classical music industry, and they are left with trying to find another way to be successful in a very competitive industry, not having a ton of prestige currency. And what this causes is a lot of musicians to devalue their own work and devalue their own skills and take a lot of gigs and opportunities that either pay nothing or they pay pitifully little, like little to nothing or nothing at all, simply because it might look good on their resume, because it might give them a valuable connection. It might be like an opportunity to like rub shoulders with somebody famous. So I'm not saying that there is no good in any of that because obviously, you know, it, so once in a lifetime chances do come along. But I think that too many musicians fall into the trap of believing that if they subject themselves enough to these kinds of opportunities, the ones that they believe, oh, after this will be my big break. After this, I will have the connections I need to do X, Y, Z, etc. If they fall into this trap, thinking that a magical door is going to open one day for them, and a greater worthwhile opportunity will present itself, they a lot of them become disillusioned by this way of thinking when that does not materialize. And, I see the classical voice teaching world also having its own prestige preoccupation as well, with instructors who teach and coach within academia generally considered to be more qualified and more sought after than those who do not. So there are a lot of wonderful professional organizations for voice teachers and voice coaches, and the resources that they offer are often valuable, and the training often worthwhile. But being associated with one of these organizations, or being inside that organization's inner circle, or having some sort of high level of visibility there, is its own form of prestige. And of course, we see prestige playing out in, casting and hiring decisions. As much as we would like to think that everything in this industry is based on merit, that is not true. Uh, and it's difficult to find data to support this, but virtually any musician I know can provide anecdotal evidence of artists with more prestigious credits on their resumes getting hired over similarly skilled artists with less prestigious credits. So the bottom line is that an undue emphasis on this prestige and prestige credits, it creates an unequal playing field in nearly every respect, and it shouldn't, and it doesn't need to. So I think um what's also done in the classical music world is compelled more musicians to pursue higher level academic training. So you have more singers who have master's degrees now than 30 years ago. There was like a 55% increase in master's degrees in music awarded between like 1995 and like 2022. Um, but ironically, so we have more musicians pursuing these higher level degrees. Ironically, the more commonplace that a master's degree becomes, the less prestige is associated with it, because now everybody has one, right? 30 plus years ago, a master's degree in music was like not a rare thing, but it wasn't super, super common. And now it is like so commonplace that some people consider a master's degree, the new bachelor's degree. And I think this is true in other fields as well, not just music. So the result of all of that is that it's made the industry even more competitive, because you have more musicians that are working harder to compete for spots in, rigorous, exclusive academic programs that will award them degrees. Uh, and then after they get those degrees, they are all competing for the same opportunities in the wider world, the wider classical singing world. So it's a problem for all degree holding persons, degree holding musicians. But even more for those who have earned master's degrees from those schools that are not considered prestigious, right? Um, because having a master's degree from a household name institution or a really famous institution still carries a lot more weight than a master's degree from a school that nobody's heard of. Which is really, really ironic, because if you think about this, given that each school is issuing the same degree in the same discipline, according to the same academically accredited standards, one would assume, right? Um, it's all the same. The courses taken, the skills that students learn, the hours that they practice, hopefully, are all comparable. They've done the same amount of work, and yet one carries more weight than the other. And that's the only real difference, is the name on top of the institution where you went, right? That's it. You can get high level training at all kinds of schools, not just household name schools or really prestigious conservatories. You can get quality instruction and a quality education in a lot of different places. Um, a lot of that even comes down to the individual teacher, right? And good teachers can be found anywhere. I have so many colleagues who teach in academia, and some of them teach at prestigious schools and some of them don't. but they're all wonderful teachers. And, I do believe that we should keep our artistic standards high. I don't believe that music schools, should accept just anyone, right? That's not what I'm saying here. Uh, However, I think that there are a lot of students who, when they are young, 17, 18 years old, applying for colleges, um, they have a lot of, like, unrealized potential, many of them. And those who, did not have the privilege of having musical instruction when they were younger, or mentorship that would give them a leg up in the, music school admissions process, these people are often overlooked by top tier schools, and they end up having to matriculate elsewhere. So they often get just as good an education, right, as I was just talking about, because, again, good teachers and good instruction can be found at many different schools if you know where to look. But these musicians, having gone to a less prestigious school, they enter the industry with far less prestige privilege than their peers who have degrees from top tier conservatories. So, maybe you're, like, sitting there thinking, like, "Well, doesn't a degree mean something?" Like, a degree is not completely pointless, right? And, like, that's absolutely true. A degree does mean something. What it means is that, you have likely put in the work required to earn those letters after your name. So you have practiced the hours, you have completed the performance projects, you have written the papers, you've studied all the things, you've done the practicums. And through all of that, it's likely that you picked up some skills. One would hope that you pick up some skills in the process of doing all of that, and some knowledge and some know how. Unfortunately, however, a degree does not necessarily equal skill. Or I would say more precisely, it does not necessarily indicate skill. It does not automatically translate to skill. It merely indicates that you have completed an objective set of requirements and accomplishments, some of which are skill based and many of which are not. So, speaking anecdotally from my own experience, I have worked with musicians in the work that I do, which, if you've been following me for a little bit, I do a lot of professional choral singing, ensemble work, chamber work, things like that. I have worked with musicians in these spheres with degrees from top tier music schools who have not had all of the requisite skills to do the job in front of them. And I've also collaborated with many musicians who hold no music degrees at all, zero, who have a very high level of artistic skill and are very good at what they do. So when you get a degree, the institution who awards you that degree, they are essentially granting you credibility that is then your responsibility to fulfill on. They grant you the letters that you can put after your name, but it is your job to make those letters mean something. And if you make them mean something, like you back them up with real world skill and experience and all that, you increase the value and the weight of your own degree in the eyes of other people, which has positive consequences, right? Not only for you, but I think for like the general master's degree carrying musicians in the industry, because these people have worked long and hard for this. So degrees do carry credibility, but we want to make sure that we are backing up that credibility with actual skills. And, that we prove that we can execute artistic tasks in a real world professional context. And if you cannot do that, you are devaluing your own degree and that of musicians everywhere. Okay. So another thing that people say when I talk about this is, what about reputation? Like, isn't prestige the same thing as reputation? Reputation's everything in this field. Isn't prestige just the same thing? So I can see why some people might think that, but I would say the answer is no. Because reputation is earned, and prestige is merely qualification by association or someone's perception that they have of somebody else. Going back to our definitions of prestige from earlier, um, the uh, the perception of their achievements or their quality. their estimation in the eyes of people, right? These speak to someone's perception of another person. They are not necessarily based in anything objective, only what someone perceives to be a reality. And this does not mean that it is always a false reality, right? But it has the potential to be based in a false reality because it is subjective. So this isn't an objective thing. Whether or not someone is considered prestigious has the potential to be based on very vague, subjective criteria. And I think that it's possible to have a perception of someone that is based on objective criteria, like their skill, their character, their actions. But in my opinion, that is not prestige, actually. That is reputation. That is what reputation is. Reputation is based on you as a person and how you show up as a musician in the real world. So it is based on your level of skill, your ability to execute, and the character traits, the personality traits that make you either a pleasure or a pain to work with for other people. And reputation is something that is cultivated by all musicians, whether they are consciously doing that or not, whether they are being intentional about it or not. And any musician can build a good reputation for themselves regardless of their prestige credits. And that is good news. Because for those who do not have prestige credits, they still have a way to differentiate themselves and set themselves apart. So, reputation is something that we should care about, especially because our field is very saturated. There are tons of musicians, way more musicians than opportunities. So, we don't want to become preoccupied with what others think of us. We don't want to become kind of an obsession, but we do want to offer other people every opportunity to judge us favorably. That is not a bad thing. So, reputation is different from prestige, and it is something that every musician should care about. So, I think that not all prestige is bad. I think that talking about your qualifications and your credentials can be a helpful thing in certain contexts, especially when you're talking with like non-musicians who maybe they don't understand the inner workings of our field, right? So telling a non-musician that you're talking to that you have a master's degree or a doctoral level degree in your area of study, that gives them some kind of idea of the level of work and dedication that you've put into your career in terms that they can understand. The same goes for, performance credits with like household name institutions and things like that, or, places where you might teach or work. So I think that there's some benefit to that when we engage with, people in other fields and other disciplines. But I think that within the music world, there is still a lot that we can do to level the playing field and, view other artists and their credentials and their skills a lot more objectively. So I would like to see prestige be replaced by artistic skill as the primary currency in the classical music world. And there are some places where this already is occurring, right? But I still think we can do better. And there are some ways that I think that we can do that. And I'm going to talk about those ways here. So the first would be more objective and thorough audition processes. So I'm going to, just talk about from a singer's perspective and experience, what is a typical audition experience when you're auditioning for like a stage production or like a organization, institution, something like that. So you walk in to the audition room, you hand the panel your materials, and the panel has already listened to like dozens of other qualified singers all day long, and they will hear dozens more probably after you leave. You hand them your stuff, you get up there, you sing a couple of arias, and you walk out. And there are a lot of problems with this format. So the first, obviously, is that it's just a snapshot. It only shows that you can perform a few minutes worth of prepared, polished solo music, sung accompanied by a piano. It doesn't actually show the breadth and depth of your skill. It might show certain things, but it's never going to show everything. It's never going to show how quickly you learn new music. It's never going to show how well you take direction. It's never going to show them what it would actually be like to work with you. And so this process happens. Auditions are done for the day, and the panel is left with decisions to make. And this is where headshots are helpful because it helps them remember who people looked like and who they liked and who they'd prefer to pass on. Um, but they will be weighing many, many qualified options. So consider among dozens or hundreds of singers what might tip the scale for them. Probably your resume. So it's possible that they'll look at your performance credits, right? They probably will, see what you've done, where you've done it. But it's equally possible that they'll look at where you studied, with whom you studied, who are the other directors you've worked with. And if you have prestige credits, you'll likely have a greater chance of getting hired over a similarly skilled candidate with less prestigious credits. So instead, I think that auditions should be a much more in-depth process that really allow the panel to assess a wider range of skills that will be necessary for the job. So if it's for an opera production, for example, why don't we ask auditionees to do a mock scene rehearsal with some other singers who might be involved in the production? That would require them to show how well they take stage direction, how well they learn blocking and staging, um, and it would allow the panel to see how they interact with their scene mates, the other musicians who are in the scene. This would be after like giving them the music in advance, obviously. Or, if it's for a choral ensemble, why not have the singer sight read or sing prepared music with the group to see how well they can adjust their tone and blend and balance and tune and things like that. Um, why not have them sing their prepared solo unaccompanied so you can assess how good their intonation really is? Things like that. So, of course, like all of this would be way more time consuming. It would involve way more work on the part of everybody involved. But I believe that it would also save everyone work and time and energy and frustration, frankly, later on, because the more accurately you can assess someone's actual artistic skill during the hiring process, as opposed to just relying on their resume credits, the more likely you are to find the right person for the job. And because time to hear auditionees would be more limited with a process like this, companies and organizations can be much more explicit and clear and specific about the kind of artists that they're looking for the openings that they have, including the skills and the qualities that they think are necessary for each particular project. And artists who believe that they possess those skills will be more motivated to apply. And those who believe they do not have those skills will hopefully self-select out and look for other things. And it's better for the artist because it gives them more opportunity during the audition to show what they're about, gives them ample time to get their nerves kind of out of the way after the first few minutes, which allows them to perform better overall. And it also gives them an idea of what it's like to work with you. So we don't have to rely on resumes. We don't have to rely on prestige credits and performance credits and things like that. We can go by how people actually deliver skill in an actual artistic context. That would be much more, I think that's much more important. So that's the first thing is revamping the audition process. The second thing would be to really talk to artists and especially young artists who are still in school about the importance of developing a brand or at least having some kind of online presence that is meaningful and consistent and representative of the work that they are doing or that they hope to do. Um, because in 2026 in this 21st century world of the internet and social media, there is a lot online for artists to leverage for their careers. So of course, there are websites that's been a necessity for a long time now. But things like a YouTube channel, a TikTok page, an artist profile on Facebook, those can also be powerful marketing tools. And teaching artists how to leverage those platforms strategically can again level the playing field because it's a place it's a place from which all artists regardless of backgrounds can start and grow their skill in this area to speak to their true expertise in some way, going beyond simply what they can fit on a resume or show in a recording. right? We should still have resumes and recordings, but they don't show a lot of things, as we've discussed. You need something that's really going to go deeper and show the depth of who you really are and what you really do. So allowing it allows people to curate a brand and a reputation, and that can lead to more valuable connections and more work. And the good thing about the internet, in this case, it's a good thing, is if you want to gain followers on the internet, it doesn't matter what your prestige credits are, right? There are ways to leverage this that have nothing to do with where you went to school, nothing to do with your resume. What matters is how well you can speak to your own expertise and position yourself as someone who must be hired, for this job. You position yourself as the perfect person for the work. Um, it is a completely separate skill from how well you can sing, how well you can play, how well you can sight read, or how well you can improvise, or anything like that. It is a separate set of skills that all musicians must learn, and one that can help to level the playing field so that it emphasizes skill more than prestige in terms of hiring decisions. The other thing would be to normalize alternative training paths and alternative training programs for artists. Because, I think about classical voice training and what it would look like outside of academia, and sometimes I feel like it would be better off outside of academia and treated more like a trade that you learn with different mentors, and you work, alongside them on the job, and you gain real world practical skills. Um, I think that sometimes I think that there is something to be said for this kind of environment for training singers. We need the academic stuff too. We need the theoretical knowledge. We need the knowledge of history and all of that stuff. But a complaint that I hear from a lot of people who have gone through conservatory, whether it's undergraduate or graduate, is not enough practical performance opportunities are available for all students. And treating music like a trade where you are required to work in the field alongside mentors allows you to start building a lot of practical skills sooner. So, it's hard to say what this would look like because it would be obviously a huge change from the current system, which is like pretty much academia only. So I don't expect it to happen anytime soon, but I think making the shift to from music as solely an academic discipline to music as a trade that is acquired through like hands-on practical experience would be a valuable mindset shift for a lot of people. Um, because the depth of skill that you can absorb is deeper and more experiential than what you can get just from learning about something in a classroom or in an institution. And this would enable younger artists who are in this kind of training path to also still focus on those like music adjacent subjects that are necessary. Um, and they wouldn't have like the general education requirements of like a university degree or like a liberal arts degree component to sort of draw their focus away from the trade that they are learning. They'd have more time to become proficient at things like languages, diction, and to explore like other forms of art, non-musical art, literature, history, anything that's like pertinent or adjacent to their academic study. Um, Another thing, if, we're normalizing alternative training programs, normalizing more diverse paths in the music industry is also going to help with this. So, performing is often still presented or talked about as the normative sort of path for young artists. Anything that is not performing is often seen as like um, a backup plan or something else that like simply supports the performing career, and I think this does young artists a really big disservice because most of them will not go on to have full-time performance careers. That's just not a reality for a lot of musicians coming out of school these days. And we don't want these people to feel like failures simply because a full-time performance career did not materialize for them out of thin air the way that they had hoped. And you know, it's also because the number of artists entering the industry is still far outpacing the number of opportunities that are available. So, teaching young artists and coaching them on how to diversify their careers also has a practical purpose for them. Uh, I think that we need to start equalizing other artistic paths with performance in terms of like how elite or exclusive we feel that it is, because you still hear a lot of talk about uh, teaching, coaching, producing, directing. They're often only talked about as only practical alternatives that can support a performance career rather than as legitimate artistic paths to explore in and of themselves in their own right. And, the reality is that, all of these things require their own special skill set to do well. And they do not have to be secondary to performing or be considered less elite. They are just different. They're their own disciplines with their own, sort of like sub art forms in the classical world. And they require a very specific set of skills to do at a high level, most of them. So I think that musicians should pursue artistic endeavors other than performing, not because they need to in order to have a sustainable career, which they might, but also because, most artists are like multifaceted creative people who are interested in like a variety of things, and doing other musical things and having other creative outlets would help them to feel more fulfilled and give them more avenues for their creative expression than just performing, especially if the performance opportunities are limited in whatever field or area that they are in. So, I think that emphasizing that part time performance careers are okay, that is fine. You do not have to be performing full time. If you want to call yourself a performer, you still have to do it, right? You still have to perform at a high level and be good at it. If you want that, as part of your identity, as part of your label. But what I'm talking about here is that excellence should be the criteria, not whether you do it full time or not. So skill should be the determining factor, not how much money you make from it or how much of your time is devoted to it. So if you perform at a high level and you are committed to doing that frequently with some amount of frequency, then you are a performer. And it doesn't matter if you are doing it full time or not. Couple more things that would help make the shift from prestige as currency to artistic skill as currency. So that would be next is to encourage entrepreneurship. Uh, so we know that opportunities at the highest echelon of the music industry are pretty scarce. We all know this. Um, so if those opportunities are not a fit for you, then create your own. So yes, it's a lot of work and it requires a lot of skills that most musicians don't learn in conservatory. But in the end, it is often more rewarding to create something that is your very own or to have your own business as an artist than to chase after things that aren't a great fit for you or aren't going to make you the money that you want. So entrepreneurial skills, administrative skills, these kinds of things should be included in every artist training program because they will allow them to create more performance opportunities for themselves and for their fellow artists, right? So we can teach them how to set up business structures, teach them basic financial literacy, bookkeeping skills, how to be their own booking agent, how to be leaders. And finally, and this is really important, I think that we need to emphasize for young artists that they need to have a vision for their careers. A vision is not optional. They have to have a vision for why they are doing art and what they want to do with that art that is not connected to external validation, looking for praise or for accolades or for fame or glory or anything like that. There has to be a more deeply rooted philosophical intrinsic motivation for pursuing this art form if you want to make it further than further than just your days in academia. You have to know on a deep level why you want it. So in-depth coaching, and mentoring that gives artists the space to articulate this vision for themselves and craft that for themselves. That is really, really important and is going to set them up for greater success. So all of these ideas, they are just ideas. I'm not saying that they all have to happen at once. Some of them are already starting to happen in certain circles. Um, like the business training and academia and the entrepreneurship coaching and all of that. There are more and more artists doing that and mentoring young people, and that is great. But even doing just a couple of these things would help to make the shift from prestige as currency to artistic skill as currency in the classical music industry, because they will allow artists to build a reputation that is based on their ability to execute and get results rather than just what's on their resume. And that levels the playing field, considerably. So there are probably more ways that we could do this rather than the ones that I mentioned here. Uh, and like I said, some of these are being starting to be implemented already. Some of them could be very easily implemented inside music academia as it stands, I think. So, all that to say, as we wrap up here, I think it is good to take pride in your accomplishments. It is good to have a healthy sense of pride in, what you have done, the work that you have put in, the dedication, the grit, the perseverance, like all the stuff that goes into becoming a good musician, because it is a hard path. It requires a ton of skill and a ton of skill synthesizing, and a lot of people just aren't aware of the level of training and the depth of training that is required to do what we do very, very well. So I think it is okay to be proud of that, to take pride in that. Um, but I think we also have to remember that our accomplishments do not define us as people. We all have no problem saying like, "Oh, your failures don't define you," and that is also true, right? When someone fails at something, whatever failure is or even looks like, we encourage them by saying, "Oh, like that failure doesn't define you." Um, but it's the same with your accomplishments. It's the same with your successes. Those things do not define you. They're just things that you do. They're not who you are. So whether it's a thing you do that doesn't work out or a thing you do that does work out, you don't want to tie your worth as a person to either of those things, because your humanity and your personhood goes far beyond those things, and it goes beyond your academic degrees, where you work. It even goes beyond your skills. Right, I've been talking a lot about skill and stuff in this, podcast, but, it really even goes beyond that. We are artists, but we are human beings first, and, we should not forget that the human stuff is what is important. And part of that ties back to what I said about, like, having that vision, having that intrinsic, more philosophical, deeply rooted reason for pursuing music and, and cultivating this art. Because that human stuff, that's what makes us better artists, you know, on top of the skill and the training. The human stuff is what we can bring to our music to make it really unique and special and different from someone else's music. So I think that there's more room in the industry for humanity, more humanity in general. We just need to find ways to help young musicians bring that out so they don't feel like they are cogs in a wheel. So they don't feel like they are just a number among, an industry that is saturated with people who seem to be just like them. I think the more that we can encourage musicians to have some individuality and some uniqueness in what they bring, that is what is going to make our industry more vibrant, more colorful. It will ensure that it will thrive, and it's going to keep artists happier. So that is what I have for you on the podcast today. I thank you for tuning in, for listening on the replay, and we will be back next week with another podcast. See you soon.